was the announcement that CM Punk, Phil Brooks, has officially signed a multi-fight contract with UFC, and he will compete in UFC. He'll debut sometime in 2015, not sure when. It could be at least 6 months, maybe longer away, so he's not fighting anytime soon, but at some point, probably in the second half of next year, the plan is for CM Punk to step into the octagon for the very first time. They made the announcement with Joe Rogan and Punk, who was there. He had AJ Lee with him. Punk says he is likely to fight at middleweight, maybe at welterweight, but definitely not light heavyweight, so he's looking at somewhere in that 155 to 185 pound range. I think in the post-fight scrum after the show last night, he was doing media interviews, and he said he was looking at 185, so that's kind of what he's got in mind. He said he's 100% committed to this. This is his new career. He's either going to kick ass or get his ass kicked. He'll make an announcement soon about a training camp. Look, I'm happy for the guy. He seemed legitimately happy. He was all smiles. He's all in on this. He's had an interest in MMA for a long, long time. He's been training under the Gracies for a long time now, doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's videos on YouTube of him rolling around, I think, with Henner. So this is not something that is new to him. But at the same time, the dude's 36 years old, with a body that has been beaten to shit by years of pro wrestling. I'm not sure, personally, how smart it is for a guy who has admitted to having at least a dozen concussions in his lifetime to be stepping into the octagon. But it's his life. He can do with it what he wants. And that's his prerogative. I can't hate on the guy for doing what he wants to do. He's got more balls than most. And I throw Kurt Angle in that category, too. Now, maybe if Kurt Angle was a little younger and a little healthier and wasn't so beat up, maybe he would have made the jump to UFC. But Dana White has said, he took Kurt seriously many, many years ago when Kurt said he wanted to come over and do some fighting after he left WWE. And I think they even had gotten to the medical phase. Now, according to Dana White, Angle couldn't pass a medical physical. Angle says something differently. So it's all a matter of who you believe. I probably would believe Dana White over Kurt Angle in that situation. But at the end of the day, Kurt blew so much smoke up people's asses for years about how he's going to come to UFC. He's serious about this. He wants to fight. And he never did. And I don't want to sit here and say Kurt Angle didn't have the balls, because Kurt Angle's a lot tougher than I am. But at the same time, he was blowing smoke. He never had the gumption to actually say, okay, I'm going to really do this. CM Punk did. And if he goes in there and he gets his ass kicked, which I think there's a very good chance that's going to happen, then it happens. But I give the guy a lot of credit for actually going through with this. I don't think this ends well for him. That's my view on this. But for Dana White and the UFC, it's a brilliant move. I mean, if I was Dana White, I would have done the exact same thing. There is no pro wrestler in the world right now that has as much buzz around him as CM Punk, and now it's gone up tenfold. You got Bellator, if you're UFC, breathing down your neck right now. There's more of a, the old Monday Night War back and forth with WWE and WCW. There's more of that in MMA right now than there is in pro wrestling. So they've got Bellator breathing down their neck. This now creates a huge buzz that the UFC can badly use right now. That first Punk fight, which I would have to think will be on a pay-per-view, but who knows, maybe it'll be on Fox, that's going to do huge business. Huge business. Are you kidding me? I mean, these guys are in the business of making money, so they're going to do that with Punk and spades, at least on that first fight. Now, if he gets his ass knocked out and embarrassed, I don't know that there'll be much money in a second CM Punk fight, although, according to him, it's a multi-fight contract. But in that first fight, they're going to make tons of money, and Punk is going to make tons of money. It's the same dynamic with Brock Lesnar. The MMA fans who absolutely hate the idea of a pro wrestler coming into their world are going to pay money to see this guy destroyed. And pro wrestling fans are going to pay money either to see him win, or they'll pay money just out of curiosity to see him fight, whether they like the guy or not. I have no idea who you would match him up with. I consider myself more of a casual MMA fan. I don't proclaim to be a hardcore MMA fan. I know the names of all the fighters. I don't. And I have no idea who they would match this guy up with. My guess is it would be another dude fighting for the first time. Otherwise, they'll just feed him some kind of scrub, kind of like they did at first. Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley's had a couple of Bellator fights now. They seem to be going up a little bit more in experience level, his opponents each time. They'll put him in there with a scrub the first time. They have to. Anybody with real experience is going to kill him. It's going to kill him. And they know that. And I said this on Twitter, if it wasn't for weight classes, can you imagine the business that UFC would do for a Brock Lesnar CM Punk fight? It would be an absolute slaughter, but it'd be a slaughter worth every bit of $1 million buys on pay-per-view. It's too bad we can't see it. I would pay to see it, but that's not going to happen. So, good for Punk. You know, I'm sure Vince McMahon is not bothered by this at all. No sweat off his back. After all, UFC isn't competition to WWE. Isn't that right, Vince? Now, if only Doc Amon had cut that thing out of Punk's back when he asked him to and didn't feed him full of Z-Packs, none of this would have happened. But as fate turned out, it all led CM Punk to the Octagon, so we'll see how he does next year. But obviously the internet blew up last night. That was the big news. It was a big surprise. People did not know that the deal was done. There have been rumors about it for a while. I don't think people honestly expected this to happen. The fact that it not only happened, but the announcement happened so quickly. Apparently the deal was done like a week ago. That came as a shock to a lot of people. And it's funny, too, because I know Punk, I watched, again, the media scrum he did when the show was over. And he was sitting at the table, and they were asking him questions at the post-fight press conference. And you know, he mentioned his wife, AJ, was there with him. And he even admitted, my wife is not thrilled about this. I would think not. You know, CM Punk, hey, Brock Lesnar didn't even come out of MMA unscathed. That scar you see on Brock's face was from one of his fights. Had his face split open. CM Punk may be coming out of this with more than just a few scars. If I were AJ Lee, I wouldn't feel too happy about this either. But he seems happy. We'll see if he's still happy after his first fight. I want to mention the Sound Off Extra review I did of the Austin McMahon podcast, because I'm not going to get into it here other than to say it was awesome. It was excellent. It's well worth taking an hour and 15 minutes of your day to go watch it if you did not. And I would watch the video of it. Austin's probably going to put the audio up on Podcast One this week. I don't know if there'll be more that we didn't see, if there's like bonus audio, but do yourself a favor, if you have a network subscription, watch it on the network, because it's worth it just to see, actually visually see the interaction between Austin and Vince's facial reactions to some of the questions. You don't get the same dynamic, I think, if you just listen to it. I thought it was great. You know, they touched on a lot of different subjects, from millennials, which apparently Vince is not a fan of, and we're not ambitious enough. Cesaro, who he all but buried on this podcast. And I don't want to hear from people, well, he was trying to motivate Cesaro, just like he was trying to motivate the roster. No, he buried them. Cesaro, he talked about Punk. This is before all the UFC news broke. Randy Savage, I guess one of the bigger pieces of news to come out of it is that he confirmed Savage is absolutely going to go into the Hall of Fame. Didn't say when, probably going to happen next year. So there was a lot of ground that they covered, and Austin, he shied away from some stuff. He didn't follow up when he should have on a handful of questions, but I thought overall he did a bang-up job, and I did a full hour-long review of the thing from start to finish. It's up on our YouTube channel. It's got closing in now on 18,000 views, so go ahead and check that out if you haven't already done so. Just to stay on the Punk subject, just for a little bit longer, he did part 2 with Colt Cabana on The Art of Wrestling this past week. They were supposed to be answering fan questions. I guess the fans crashed the email address, so they didn't really spend very much time at all answering fan questions. But I still thought it was a very... I don't want to say it was better than Part 1, because I thought Part 1 was more intriguing with the backstage stuff and all that, but it was actually really... It was really good. It was an easy listen. Punk said that he didn't want to hear that it was a coincidence that the lawyers did not talk to talent relations, and so that's why he got his termination papers on his wedding day. He made it very clear. He spoke to Triple H on June 11th, and on June 13th he received a FedEx overnight with a document that was dated June 12th. Now, I know there was a lot of wrestlers who were also cut, I think, on that date. There was like a mass firing, and on WWE.com they had a list of all these different people who were released. Punk was not one of those people. So he was not part of that list. I'm with Punk on this. You got to have your head in the clouds to think that this was just a coincidence. I tried to give Vince the benefit of the doubt when I talked about this, I think, last week, and said, okay, maybe Vince didn't know, but certainly Triple H must have known. At the end of the day, I think Vince probably did know. Triple H knew for sure. This was not a coincidence, people. This was not a coincidence. And he also mentioned, AJ had asked for that time off so she could get married and go on her honeymoon. And then the week after the honeymoon, she was already back on TV. So he doesn't want to hear it was a coincidence, and neither do I. It was not a coincidence. It was a very calculated move that blew up in their face, and now CM Punk is in UFC. And he's going to use a lot of that notoriety and all of his fame that he built up in WWE on Vince McMahon's watch to make money for Dana White and UFC. And you know what? That's on Vince McMahon. That's his fault. On Vince's apology, Punk said if it was a sincere apology, then he wouldn't have used it as a publicity stunt. That was the first he heard of Vince apologizing to him, and it was in front of the camera on the network. He says, you have my phone number, you have my address, you can show up when you're a 10-minute drive from my house, and apologize to me like a man. So that was his position on that. He said he was sick and tired of being sick and hurt, he was burnt out, and he walked, and he said, I can do that because I'm an independent contractor. He said their contracts with their non-competes are not worth the paper they're printed on. And the fact is, he's been proven right multiple times. Look at Brock Lesnar. Look at Alberto Del Rio. They had non-competes too, and at the end of the day, they were able to go work somewhere else without being punished because the whole thing is nonsense. And I posted on my Twitter on Thursday night, so go back to my Twitter on Thursday night or just do a Google search. Somebody had sent me a link to a blog that was done by this law firm, Strasburger and Price, I believe the name of it is. And it was from last year, and the title of the blog is, No, 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 your independent contractor cannot sign a non-compete, never, ever. This was written by a law firm. Find that piece. It is well worth reading. And it just goes to the heart of why this whole independent contractor label in WWE is such a farce. And I think it might have been Robert on my Facebook page who posted kind of a rebuttal where he pointed out that WWE provides catering for their wrestlers, and they do provide for some transportation, and there's a lot of things they do. Nobody is ignoring the fact that WWE does all of those things. I said this last week on my podcast. WWE pays for their airfare, but the wrestlers are responsible for their rental cars and their hotels. They do provide for catering. Absolutely. There are things that they do. Nobody is hiding that. That's not a big secret. But that doesn't change the fact that the classification of what these guys are is just, it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. It doesn't change that. Nothing changes. It's a farce. You got to read that blog. I mean, you look at that headline and it really jumps out at you. Punk said he was suspended. Nobody contacted him to tell him he was unsuspended and to say, hey, okay, we want you back at TV. And I thought this was interesting. He said, maybe in 2 months, I'd be feeling better by that point, or I'd have come to my senses, but nobody ever found out because nobody ever reached out. That tells me, when I hear him say that there was a very good chance he would have come back had Vince reached out to him around that time. Now, he walked out on them. So I get it if they didn't immediately pick up the phone and call the guy and grovel for him to come back. Maybe they shouldn't have. If that were me and the guy walked out on me, I don't know that I would have been getting down on my hands and knees ready to, blow him. But they should have apologized for nearly working him to death. Literally to death on the staph infection thing. Because that to me is the most inexcusable part of this whole story. Wrestlers get beat up. They're hurt all the time. Punk is hardly the only guy. I don't really have a lot of sympathy for him just having injuries in general. But the staph infection story, and it makes total sense to me that he ended up getting everything that he wanted to, and he didn't have to sign a non-disparage agreement, and they threw out the non-compete. Think of everything this guy got. Think of why he is now in the UFC. Less than a year after walking out on Vince McMahon, after walking out on his contract. How do you think this guy is allowed to walk around and publicly trash the company and sign a deal with their competitor? I don't give a shit what Vince McMahon says. UFC is absolutely a competitor. They're more of a competitor to them than TNA is. Why do you think Punk was allowed to do all of these things if what he was saying on the podcast with Cabana was complete lies? I mean, think about this for a second, people. Use your brain. Use common sense. The medical stuff is probably what tipped the scales in his favor. I absolutely believe the story about the staph infection. And to me, he was at least owed an apology for that, because that is inexcusable. And the fact that the doctor is still working, they didn't get rid of him, he's still there, he's still treating other wrestlers, that's a scary thing. How does something like that go unnoticed for so long? I would think he would at least be owed an apology for that. Maybe Vince didn't know. Again, I find all of that very hard to believe. for walking out on them, I kind of get that. That the guy would feel he's owed an apology, yet he walked out on them. That, to me, I can understand them not coming back to Punk and groveling. On the medical stuff, though, that's a whole other ballgame. But that, to me, is what was most interesting about this, is that he would probably be in WWE right now, had they just reached out and apologized at least for the medical stuff. It sounds like at that point he had not completely shut the door on a return. Now, of course, he's in UFC, but back then they still had a shot. And that, to me, was the most intriguing thing. Now, just to wrap the Punk stuff up, and then we'll move on, he told some stories as well about other opportunities. You know, he went into on the first Cabana podcast opportunities that he had to make more money and maybe bring some more notoriety to the company and up his own profile that Vince shot down. And in a lot of cases, not only did they shoot him down, they gave those opportunities to other people, like John Cena and Randy Orton. So here he gave a few more examples. He shared a story about Wizard World. Because Punk is a big comic book fan, it makes sense that he would, be doing something at an event like Wizard World. So he had gotten an offer to appear at Wizard World for a panel. They were going to pay him $20,000 for about 4 hours worth of work. He went to the office first, like a good little soldier, to let them know and to get it cleared. And they not only said no to letting Punk do it, they sent other people, including John Cena, in his place. He had a friend, another example, who worked on the reality show LA Inc., and they wanted to feature Punk on the show. Punk obviously is a big tattoo guy. He told the office, and they said, nope, you don't want Punk, you want Randy Orton, who had just gotten, I guess, his tattoo sleeves done maybe a few months before. The Slim Jim. The Slim Jim story is the one that probably aggravated me the most listening to it. Slim Jim wanted Punk to be the new face of their brand like Randy Savage used to be. That's a big endorsement. Not just for the company, but for the person who's in that position. And I think actually when Savage left WWE, he took the Slim Jim sponsorship with him, which may have been another reason why Vince was not happy with him. Punk's a huge fan of Randy Savage, emulates him, uses moves. He's dressed up using, Savage's old tights on occasion. He's a big Randy Savage fan. Who isn't? And that could have meant big money for him and big money for the company as well. So he had a meeting with the president of Slim Jim. They gave him all these Slim Jims to take home with him that day. He was so happy. They even went over creative for the commercial they were going to work on. He would play this camp counselor in the commercial. And he tells WWE, and so what do? They give it instead to Rey Mysterio, Big Show, and Eve Torres. And the campaign was such a big hit, I barely remember it. That infuriated me just listening to it. Out of all the stuff he talked about on the second show, that is what pissed me off the most listening to it. It's obvious that no matter how popular you may be, if you don't fit the image of what they're looking for, if you're not already the tippy-top guy there, you're not going to get the same opportunities as other people. And Punk was a big, big star. He was the closest, I think, that they ever came to creating a new star on the level of a John Cena. Nobody has ever gotten at that level yet. Not Orton, not Daniel Bryan, not even Punk. He was almost there. He was the closest thing they had. And if they're doing this to a guy like him, then what chance does somebody like a Daniel Bryan or Dean Ambrose or somebody like that have? If let's say they get opportunities like this, you think the company's going to give it to them, or are they going to give it to John Cena? Are they going to give it to Randy Orton? You're just not going to get the same opportunities as those other people. And it's their company, so they can do what they want, although it is a publicly traded company now, so they have shareholders to answer to. But it really makes Vince McMahon look like a fool when he says nobody has tried to reach for that brass ring since John Cena, while completely ignoring a guy like Punk, or a guy like a Bryan, or Dolph Ziggler. Okay? It's disingenuous, and he's full of shit.